Kenya, 2003. A research team from Amboseli National Park is watching a herd of elephants from a distance. The oldest female in the herd, a matriarch named Echo, known to researchers for over 30 years, has died. Her family stands around her body. They touch her with their trunks. They lift her head. They place their feet gently on her still body. They do not leave. For 3 days, they stay. When they finally walk away, they walk slowly. They look back. 1 year later, the same family returns to the same spot. There are no bones left, nothing visible to mark the location. They stop anyway. They stand in silence. They remember. Now go to the Pacific Ocean. A female humpback whale is circling in open water. She has been circling for 4 days. Beneath her, at the surface, is the body of her calf. The calf died shortly after birth. The mother will not leave it. She carries it on her back when it begins to sink. She surfaces under it to keep it above water. She circles it when the current pulls it away. 4 days, then 5, then she is gone. 2 creatures, 2 completely different worlds, one on land, one in the ocean. One the largest land animal on Earth, one the descendant of an ancestor that returned to the sea 50 million years ago, and the same grief. If that parallel makes you feel something, stay with us, because by the end of this film, you will understand that grief, memory, and leadership are not human inventions. They are solutions. Solutions that evolution found twice in the 2 largest minds on this planet. Subscribe to this channel right now, because what comes next will change how you think about what it means to feel. Before we go further, let us establish who these animals are. The African elephant, Loxodonta africana, is the largest land animal on Earth. An adult bull can weigh up to 7,000 kilograms. It has a brain weighing approximately 5 kilograms, the largest brain of any land animal. Inside that brain is a structure called the temporal lobe, enlarged far beyond what body size alone would predict. The temporal lobe is associated with memory, emotion, and social processing. The elephant's temporal lobe is so large that it creates visible bulges on the sides of the skull. The brain is built for remembering, for feeling, for navigating complex social relationships. Now the whale. The blue whale, Balanoptera musculus, is the largest animal in the history of life on Earth. Larger than any dinosaur, larger than anything that has ever existed. But it is the sperm whale, Physeter macrocephalus, whose brain holds the record. 8 kilograms, the largest brain ever evolved by any animal in the history of life on this planet. 8 kilograms of neural tissue dedicated to echolocation, social communication, deep dive navigation, and something else. Something that researchers have been documenting carefully and cautiously for the last 2 decades. Emotion. Now let us talk about where these animals came from, because the divergence between elephants and whales is one of the most dramatic in mammalian evolution. Their last common ancestor lived approximately 90 million years ago. 90 million years. Before the asteroid that killed the non-avian dinosaurs. Before modern continents reached their current positions. Before flowers were the dominant plant form on Earth. Whales returned to the ocean approximately 50 million years ago, from a small, hoofed land mammal, related to the ancestor of modern hippos, that began wading into shallow rivers and never fully came back out. For 50 million years, the whale's lineage has been in the ocean. For 50 million years, the elephant's lineage has been on land. And in those 50 million years, they both built the same social architecture, independently, from the same ancestral starting point, but through completely different paths, in completely different environments, facing completely different pressures. The same solution, twice. We are going to spend the next hour inside the minds and the lives of these 2 animals. If you find yourself thinking about a human relationship while you watch, that is not an accident. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Every film we make will show you the living world as it actually is. Now let us talk about grief, because this is the most contested and the most important question about both of these animals. Do they grieve? The scientific community has been cautious about this word for most of the last century. Attributing human emotions to animals, a practice called anthropomorphism, was considered unscientific. Animals behaved. They did not feel. That consensus has been steadily dismantled over the last 30 years by the elephants. Researchers at Amboseli have documented elephants interacting with the bones of dead elephants, including elephants who died years earlier, in ways that cannot be explained by foraging, play, or territorial behavior. They touch the bones with their trunks. They investigate them slowly and carefully. They show particular interest in the skulls and tusks, and they show significantly more interest in the bones of elephants they knew in life than in the bones of strangers. They recognize individuals, after death, from their remains. In 2006, researchers presented elephants with 3 objects: ivory from a dead elephant, a piece of wood, and a rock. The elephants spent significantly more time investigating the ivory. They were not foraging. Elephants do not eat ivory. They were doing something else, something that looked, to every researcher who observed it, like remembrance. Now let us talk about the whales. In 2016, a sperm whale was found dead on a beach in the North Sea.
The whale had been part of a pod. For 2 days before the whale beached, its pod circled offshore. They did not leave. They were present for the death. After the whale beached and died, the pod remained in the adjacent water for hours. This behavior, staying with a dying or dead pod member, circling, not leaving, has been documented in sperm whales, humpback whales, orcas, and pilot whales across multiple decades of research. In pilot whales, researchers have documented individuals pushing dead pod members to the surface for hours, the same behavior used to assist struggling living whales. The behavior continues even when the animal is clearly dead. The whale is doing something it learned to do for living pod members, and it cannot stop, because the social bond is that strong. Now let us talk about what the research team asked about grief after documenting these behaviors. They asked, is this grief or is it something else? And the answer they arrived at was, it does not matter what we call it. What matters is that these animals show prolonged behavioral responses to the death of a social companion that disrupt normal foraging, movement, and social behavior. That they show specific recognition of individual dead animals. That they return to sites of death. That the responses are more intense for individuals they had longer relationships with. Whatever word we use for that, the behavioral reality is the same. And that behavioral reality is shared between an animal that lives in the savanna and an animal that lives in the deep ocean. Before we continue, we want to ask you something. Have you ever watched an animal grieve? A dog at a grave? A cat searching for a companion that died, and felt certain that something real was happening? Tell us in the comments, because the science is beginning to catch up with what many of you already knew. Now let us talk about the matriarch. Because in both species, the social structure revolves around a single individual whose loss is catastrophic. The oldest female, the one who remembers. In elephant herds, the matriarch is typically the oldest female in the family group. She can be 60 years old or more. She has spent 6 decades accumulating information about the landscape, the threats, the resources, the other families in the area. She knows which water holes are reliable in drought years. She knows which humans are dangerous and which are not. She knows the calls of specific lions. She knows the routes between seasonal food sources that she walked as a young elephant 40 years ago. This knowledge is not in her genes. It is in her memory.
and it is critical to the survival of her family. Researchers at Amboseli studied herds with matriarchs of different ages. In years of severe drought, herds with older matriarchs traveled to more reliable water sources, lost fewer calves, and showed lower stress hormone levels than herds with younger matriarchs. The older matriarch had experienced drought before. She remembered where the water was. Her memory was the difference between survival and death. When matriarchs are killed by poachers, which happens frequently because the largest, oldest females have the largest tusks, the consequences for the herd are devastating. The herd loses its navigation system. It loses its threat recognition system. It loses its social memory. Studies following the deaths of matriarchs have documented increased aggression within herds, reduced reproductive success, and increased mortality, particularly among young elephants who have lost their primary teacher. The matriarch is not just a leader, she is a library. And when she dies, the library burns. Now the orca. Because what happens to orca pods after the death of an older female is one of the most striking findings in marine mammal research of the last decade. Researchers studying orca populations in the Pacific Northwest have been tracking individual animals for over 40 years. They know every member of every pod. They know who is related to whom. They know the age of every individual, and they found something that stopped them. When an older post-reproductive female, a grandmother, dies, the mortality rate among adult males in her pod increases significantly in the following 2 years. For adult male orcas whose mothers have died, the mortality increase is dramatic, over 8 times higher than for males whose mothers are still alive. 8 times. The loss of the older female, who is no longer reproducing, who contributes nothing to the gene pool directly, increases male mortality by 8 times. The researchers' conclusion? She was sharing food with them. In years of salmon scarcity, she led them to food sources she remembered from previous scarcity years. Without her, they starved. The grandmother was keeping her adult children alive with knowledge she had accumulated over decades. This is called the grandmother hypothesis. It was first proposed as an explanation for why human women live so long after menopause. Why would evolution maintain a long post-reproductive lifespan? Because the grandmother's knowledge saves her grandchildren's lives. We thought this was a human thing. The orcas were doing it first. Now let us talk about the voice that travels farthest. Because both elephants and whales communicate in ways that are largely invisible to us. The elephant's primary long-distance communication is infrasound. Calls at frequencies below 20 Hz, below the lower limit of human hearing. These calls travel through the ground as well as through the air. Other elephants receive them partly through their feet, through vibration-sensitive receptors in their toe bones and the fatty pads of their soles. Elephants can detect infrasonic ground vibrations from other elephants up to 32 kilometers away. They are listening to the earth. The information carried in these calls includes identity. Each elephant has a distinctive infrasonic signature, location, emotional state, reproductive status, and specific alarm information. When a matriarch hears an unfamiliar male call, she can assess whether it represents a threat based on characteristics of the call alone. She is reading a voice she has never heard before and making accurate threat assessments from it. The whale's equivalent is the song. Humpback whale songs are the most complex vocalizations produced by any non-human animal. A single song can last up to 22 hours. The songs travel thousands of kilometers through deep ocean sound channels, the SOFAR channel, where sound travels with extraordinary efficiency. A whale in the waters off Hawaii can potentially be heard by a whale off the coast of Japan. The entire Pacific Ocean is, in some sense, a single acoustic space that humpbacks navigate through song. And the songs change. Every breeding season, Humpback males in a given ocean basin sing a slightly different version of the previous season's song. The changes spread across the population. New phrases adopted, old phrases dropped, in a pattern that researchers describe as cultural transmission. Not genetic, cultural. The song is learned. It is shared. It changes over time. It is, in the most basic sense, a musical tradition, passed from whale to whale, across the largest communication network on Earth. Now let us talk about something we want you to think about, because we are 25 minutes into this story, and if what you have heard has moved you, or surprised you, or made you think about someone you have lost, we want to know. What does it mean to you that grief is not a uniquely human experience? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because this conversation matters, and because understanding that we share these experiences with other minds changes something about how we hold them. Subscribe to this channel if you want to keep having conversations like this one. Now let us talk about mirror self-recognition, because both species have passed the test that was long considered the benchmark of self-awareness. In 2006, a research team at the Bronx Zoo placed a large mirror inside an elephant enclosure. One of the elephants, a 34-year-old Asian elephant named Happy, spent time at the mirror. Then she used the mirror to examine a white X painted on her forehead, in a location she could not see directly. She touched the X repeatedly with her trunk while watching herself in the mirror. She was using a reflective surface to investigate a part of her own body. She knew she was looking at herself. The mirror self-recognition test had previously been passed only by great apes. Happy became the first elephant on record to pass it. Subsequently, 2 other elephants at the same facility showed evidence of self-recognition as well. Dolphins, which are the cetaceans most closely related to whales in cognitive research, have passed the mirror test multiple times. The behaviors documented in dolphins at mirrors, examining their own bodies, investigating marks placed on them, looking at their own movements, are consistent with self-awareness. The 2 largest-brained lineages of mammals, both passing the test that was considered uniquely primate. Now let us talk about the self-awareness test that did not require a mirror. In 2016, researchers studying elephants played back recordings of other elephants' calls. Some were calls from elephants the subject knew, some were calls from strangers, some were calls from elephants that had died. The living elephants showed differentiated responses to all 3 categories. The most striking response, to the calls of dead elephants. The elephants showed increased alertness, increased vocalization, increased social clustering. They searched. They were looking for an individual whose voice they recognized, an individual who was no longer there. The dead elephant's voice was still in the living elephant's memory, years after death. And when they heard it, they responded as if the individual might still be found. Now let us talk about trauma, because both elephants and whales show behavioral responses to loss that go beyond what any purely mechanistic account can explain. In populations of elephants that have experienced heavy poaching, where matriarchs and other adults were killed, researchers have documented behavioral profiles in survivors that closely resemble post-traumatic stress disorder in humans. Heightened startle responses, chronic elevated stress hormones, disrupted social behavior, increased aggression, reduced reproductive success. The behavioral signatures of trauma. In elephants who witnessed the killing of family members, the whales face a different trauma. The ocean has become loud. Industrial shipping, naval sonar, seismic surveys have filled the deep ocean with noise at the exact frequencies whales use to communicate. Whales that can once hear each other across thousands of kilometers now struggle to communicate across tens of kilometers in some ocean corridors. They are being silenced. The communication network that the grandmother built over decades, the acoustic channels through which she transmitted her knowledge, is being disrupted. A pod that loses acoustic contact with its matriarch in a noisy ocean loses the same thing as a herd that loses its matriarch to a poacher. It loses its memory. Now let us talk about why these 2 animals are so similar. Because the convergence between elephants and whales is not coincidental. It is the result of a specific set of evolutionary pressures that both lineages faced. Both species are large. Large body size requires large caloric intake.
Large caloric intake requires knowledge of where food is. Across wide areas, across seasons, across years of variable conditions. Knowledge of where food is cannot be fully encoded in genes. It must be learned. Learned knowledge must be transmitted from those who have it to those who do not. Transmission requires social structure, stable groups with recognized individuals and established relationships. Stable social structure requires mechanisms for maintaining bonds, including through loss. Loss requires a response that reinforces remaining bonds. Grief, whatever we call it, reinforces social bonds. It is the mechanism by which a social group acknowledges its own importance to itself. When an elephant touches the bones of a dead companion, it is not being irrational. It is maintaining the social memory that makes the group function. When a whale circles its dead calf for days, it is not failing to understand death. It is doing what its social bonds require of it. Evolution did not build these behaviors because they feel meaningful. Evolution built them because groups that had them survived better than groups that did not. And then, the feelings came with the architecture. Now let us come back to Kenya, to the field in Amboseli where Echo's family returned 1 year after her death. They stood in the location where she died. They did not forage. They did not play. They stood and touched the ground with their trunks. They were doing something. We do not know exactly what. We do not have the words. But we know that the behavior was specific to that location, that it was specific to the family that had known her, that it was not explained by any resource in the area, that it has been documented in elephant families around the world. And in the Pacific, somewhere in the warm water where humpbacks breed, a female finally releases her calf. She has carried it for days. She lets it go. She dives. She does not look back. She goes on, because going on is what the matriarch does. Because the family needs her. Because she is the library, and the library must stay open. The next time you see an elephant, in a documentary, in a photograph, in a zoo, look at the temporal lobe bulges on the sides of its skull. That is where the memory lives. The memory of water holes and dry seasons and dead family members and the specific voices of individuals who have been gone for years. The next time you hear a recording of a whale song, understand that you are hearing a tradition, a piece of culture passing between individuals across an ocean, changing slowly, year by year, as new phrases are adopted and old ones fall away. The same way that human music changes, the same way that human memory works, the same way that human grief moves through a family after a loss. These are not metaphors. These are descriptions of real biological processes in real animals. Processes that evolution built independently, twice, in the two largest minds this planet has ever produced. What does that tell us about the nature of these experiences? What does it tell us about who else might be having them? We do not know all the answers, but we believe the questions matter, and we believe you do too. Tell us in the comments what you think. Now let us talk about something that most people have never considered about elephant intelligence. The elephant's nose. Not as a sensory organ in the way we usually think of smell, as a hand. The elephant's trunk contains approximately 40,000 individual muscles. For comparison, the entire human body contains approximately 650. The trunk can lift 300 kilograms. It can pick up a single blade of grass. It can hold 5 liters of water. It can feel the vibrations of a distant thunderstorm through the ground.
It can detect the chemical signature of water buried under dry soil from several meters away. And it can touch.
The way an elephant touches the bones of a dead family member. Slowly, carefully, with the sensitive tip of the trunk. Is not sniffing. It is reading. The chemical signature of an individual elephant persists in their bones for years after death. Each elephant has a unique chemical identity. The trunk can read that identity. The elephant is not looking at a skeleton. It is reading the chemical autobiography of an individual it knew, running its most sensitive organ over the remains of a life. This is not a metaphor. It is documented biology. And it reframes everything we observe when elephants interact with the dead. They are not confused. They are not malfunctioning. They are doing something extraordinarily precise. Reading. Remembering. Now let us talk about elephant memory in a context that most people can immediately understand. The Amboseli elephant population has been studied continuously since 1972. Researchers know every elephant by name. They have followed family groups across generations. And they have documented something that stops anyone who hears it for the first time. Elephants remember individual human researchers, not just as humans, as specific individuals. Cynthia Moss, who has led the Amboseli Elephant Research Project for over 50 years, is recognized by elephants she has known for decades. They approach her differently than they approach strangers. They are calmer. They allow closer proximity. They have categorized her as a specific individual who is known and trusted, based on 50 years of consistent benign behavior. The elephant's memory of individual humans extends across years and decades. And it is not just memory. It is a continuous updating of that memory based on new interactions. The elephant is tracking a relationship across time, the same way you track a relationship with a person you have known for 20 years. Now let us talk about something comparable in whales. Whale researchers who work with the same populations over years report something similar. Individual whales, particularly orcas, show recognition of specific boats and specific people. They approach familiar research vessels differently than unfamiliar ones. They surface more readily near boats they have encountered before without harm. They show more exploratory behavior near familiar vessels, and they transmit this knowledge. Young orcas in a pod follow the behavioral patterns of older pod members towards specific boats. They learn which boats are safe and which are not, from their mothers, from their grandmothers. The knowledge of which humans can be trusted, accumulated over years by the grandmother, transmitted to her children and grandchildren, now guiding the behavior of animals who were born after she died. The matriarch's memory extending past her own lifetime, into the behavior of animals she will never know. Now let us talk about play. Because both elephants and whales play, and play, as we have discussed in this series, is one of the strongest behavioral indicators of a complex mind. Young elephants play constantly. They chase each other. They wrestle with their trunks. They roll in mud. They slide down riverbanks. They also play with objects, sticks, rocks, pieces of cloth left by tourists. They investigate novel objects with the same methodical curiosity that primates show, and they show something that looks very much like humor. Experienced elephant researchers describe specific elephants as playful, having a consistent tendency to initiate games, to startle companions with sudden movements, to steal objects from other elephants and run. Individual personality, expressed through play. The whale equivalent is the breach. A humpback whale breaching, throwing its 40-ton body completely out of the water, is one of the most dramatic spectacles in the natural world. Researchers have proposed multiple functional explanations for breaching: communication, parasite removal, sonar calibration. But they have also documented breaching in contexts where no functional explanation fits:
young whales breaching repeatedly in calm conditions with no other whales nearby, no communication purpose, no threat, no parasites. Play. A 40-ton animal throwing itself into the air for the apparent pleasure of it. Now let us talk about what is being lost. Because the crisis facing both of these species is not just a conservation crisis. It is a memory crisis. When a matriarch elephant is killed by a poacher, what dies with her is not just an individual. It is the memory of drought routes walked 40 years ago, the recognition of specific lion prides from their calls, the knowledge of which humans in which vehicles represent a threat, the chemical autobiography of every family member she has ever known. The knowledge cannot be recovered. It does not exist anywhere else. It dies with her. When ocean noise levels rise and the grandmother orca loses acoustic contact with her pod, what is disrupted is not just communication. It is the transmission of knowledge. The routes to salmon schools in scarcity years, the behaviors that have kept her children and grandchildren alive, the cultural memory of an ocean that is changing faster than any genetic adaptation can track. We are not just losing animals, we are losing libraries. Libraries that took decades to build, that cannot be rebuilt, that contain knowledge of environments and resources and threats that no human researcher has ever documented, and that are burning, quietly, invisibly, every time a matriarch is killed for her tusks or a whale pod loses contact in a noisy ocean. Now let us talk about a question that the science cannot fully answer, but that the science is beginning to ask. Do elephants know they will die? The question sounds simple. It is extraordinarily complex. We know that elephants respond to the deaths of others. We know that they return to death sites. We know that they show behavioral changes in the presence of bones and ivory. We know that older elephants, when they are sick and near death, sometimes separate from the herd and move toward water, alone, in the same direction that other dying elephants have moved, as if they know what is coming and are going somewhere to face it. We do not know if this represents an understanding of their own mortality. We do not know if there is subjective experience accompanying it, but the behavior is there, and it is hard to watch without feeling that something is happening, something that no purely mechanistic account fully explains. The same question can be asked about whales. When an old sperm whale beaches itself, alone, away from the pod, in a location that offers no survival benefit, is it choosing? Is it going somewhere? We do not know, but we are beginning to ask. And asking, as any scientist will tell you, is how understanding begins. Now let us talk about something that happened in 2011 that changed how scientists think about elephant social intelligence. A young female elephant in Amboseli, researchers called her Maya, was observed approaching a dying elephant from a different family. Not her family, a stranger. The dying elephant was old, thin, and unable to stand. Maya stood beside her for several hours. She touched her with her trunk. She tried to help her stand, pushing gently from the side. The old elephant died. Maya did not leave immediately. She stood for a long time before rejoining her own family. This was not an isolated incident. Researchers have documented what they call elephant altruism, individuals helping injured, sick, or dying elephants that are not their relatives, removing poaching snares from the legs of other elephants, supporting elderly elephants who cannot keep up with the herd, leading injured companions away from sources of threat. These behaviors require the elephant to assess the situation of another individual, to understand that the other is in distress, and to choose to help. This is empathy made behavioral. In whales, the equivalent behavior is called epimuletic behavior, caregiving. It has been documented across at least 8 cetacean species. Individuals carrying, supporting, and staying with sick or dead companions long beyond any survival benefit to themselves. Two species, two separate evolutionary histories, the same impulse, to stay, to help, to not leave. Now let us pause, because we are deep into a story about grief and memory and altruism and the grandmother who keeps the library open. And we want to ask you something directly. Who in your life has been the keeper of memory? The one who remembered the old roots, the old names, the ones who came before. Every family has one. Every pod has one. Every herd has one. Tell us in the comments. Because this film is not just about elephants and whales. It is about what it means to carry memory for others, and what is lost when the one who carries it is gone. And if this film changed something in how you see the elephant in a photograph or the whale in a documentary, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the minds we are describing deserve to be known by as many humans as possible before the libraries close.